Hello and welcome to Buy the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert, and this is the beginning of a series that's going to take us through a course that I teach on truth, justice, and leadership. And we're going to go through a series of authors, talk about what they had to say on those topics. And we're going to start with Niccolo Machiavelli. So let me say a couple things about who Machiavelli is, and then talk a little bit about why we would begin with Machiavelli in this series. Machiavelli was an Italian, a Florentine, so he's from Florence, and he was a government official, a diplomat under the Republic of Florence. Later, when Florence was reconquered by the Medici family, Machiavelli was actually tortured under suspicion of conspiring against the new government, and he was put under house arrest. And this is when he started writing philosophical treatises. And this is actually a common pattern for a lot of philosophers who might have been involved in politics. And when they got in sufficient trouble, and then their next step was to start writing about the way the world should be. And so Machiavelli wrote a number of works. The most famous one, the one that we're going to be talking about, is The Prince. But before we get into The Prince, let's talk a little bit about why we would start with Machiavelli. The course is on truth, justice, and leadership. And as we're going to see, Machiavelli has a very definite idea about leadership. He has a very definite teaching about what it is and how to do it. But that teaching is highly distinctive in large part because he rejects the concepts of truth and justice, at least as they were classically understood. And that's going to be actually a main feature of this book, The Prince, is rejecting those ideas. So why would we start with Machiavelli? Does it imply that we think that leadership entails leaving truth and justice behind, as Machiavelli is going to argue? Not necessarily, and certainly not in my case or in this course as a whole is going to look at other options. But I'll mention a couple of reasons why I start with Machiavelli. The first one is simply because Machiavelli had such a profound influence on our society that we just don't realize how much we've been shaped by Machiavelli. So many ideas that we imbibe from many different sources, and they're just part of the culture, or things from different authors and different sources that we run into. If you trace them back, they're ideas, not necessarily ideas that Machiavelli invented, but ideas that he implemented in a certain way. He brought them to bear in Western civilization. He turned them from fringe ideas or discredited ideas into dominant ones. So he's a revolutionary figure, and the revolution has been successful enough that we don't even realize when we're being Machiavellian. That's one of the things that we're going to be studying in this course, is how to discern, if something is Machiavellian or not. What exactly does that mean? And I think that's an important skill that we need to build. So I think it's good to start with Machiavelli because there's so much Machiavelli and we want in our society, and we want to be able to see that and to to question it, to think about, is it, whatever we think about Machiavelli, where he's right or wrong about different things, we want to be aware of that influence. And the second reason is that from a more classical point of view, which most of the authors we're going to look at are going to be developing a classical view on leadership. And one thing that's distinctive about a classical view of leadership is that even if somebody is wrong, there could be some truth in what they're saying. And for us to truly be wise and to know the whole truth, as limited beings as we are, we don't automatically know the whole truth. In fact, we can spend our entire lives searching for the truth and not have the whole truth. So it's very useful to consider counter arguments, different perspectives. Even if we think that they're wrong, they can be of great value in terms of argumentation. And so I think it's highly valuable to start with Machiavelli, and then to start to put him in a context of some different ideas, and then see how that can deepen our understanding of the issues that he's dealing with, including some of the issues and ideas that he might not delve into for the sake of advancing his own views. So as mentioned, Machiavelli's most famous writing is The Prince, Il Principe in Italian. So what is this book and what is it about? First of all, if we just start with the title, The Prince. In English, we could use the word prince in a variety of ways. Often if we think of fairy tales, it's, the son of the king who's going to be the next king. We associate it with royalty and monarchy and things like that. The word has a much broader meaning originally, and especially in its philosophic or political meaning. In fact, if you go back to the Latin, the word princeps in Latin is where the Italian principe comes from, and the English prince. And it goes to a word that basically means the first thing, the thing that comes first, which can mean different things in different contexts. But politically, in terms of society and politics, it usually means the thing or the person that is authoritative. So if we think about moral principles, for example, moral principles are the rules that you follow to be a moral person. So they are the things that ultimately matter. And in a social structure, the prince is the person who is in charge. And in Latin, actually, princeps can be used basically to mean a leader. It doesn't have to be a monarch necessarily, just somebody who's a leader within society. The way that Machiavelli is using the prince is fundamentally means a ruler. And so in the book, The Prince, he is going to look mostly at monarchical figures. It does not necessarily mean that Machiavelli is a monarchist. In some of his other writings, he's advancing republicanism or rule by the people. He is not against that, and we're going to see even in The Prince that there are major elements of republicanism that are lurking there in The Prince. So it's not, even though he's going to use monarchical figures for the most part in this book as examples, it does not necessarily mean that that's what it's all about. It's all about leadership and it's all about rule. And what those things are, how to do them well, that's what Machiavelli is trying to teach us in this book. Okay, so let's crack into the book. What does Machiavelli want to teach us about leadership, about rule? We could start with the dedicatory letter. Let me mention, by the way, that I'm using the Harvey Mansfield translation, which I highly recommend because it's one of the translations that is accurate. It's very strictly accurate to the Italian. That's very important. There's a lot of sloppy translations out there, and they do not assist us with analyzing the content of what Machiavelli is saying. They can mislead us in a variety of ways. So the dedicatory letter, why do we want to focus on this? You may think a dedicatory letter is just some kind of fluff that's put at the beginning of a book for some purpose that has little to do with the content of the book. One rule for interpreting great texts, great books, that I would like to mention is that nothing that a great author writes is superfluous. Every detail that they include is meaningful. And the dedicatory letter is, in fact, Machiavelli's way of introducing himself to us. And as the author, he's going to be talking about a lot of other people in this book. He's not going to talk about himself very much, but he's an important figure. And that's true of any great work, is you want to think about the author. The author is often going to be concealing himself for the most part in talking about other people and subjects, but that doesn't mean the author is insignificant, quite the contrary. And any clues that you can find as to what the author wants to say about himself to help you understand where he's coming from and what he's up to is an important aspect of interpreting a book and really getting to the heart of what's happening there. So what is Machiavelli telling us about himself in this dedicatory letter? First of all, he dedicates the book to the magnificent Lorenzo de' Medici. And this is fascinating because, of course, the Medicis are the ones who tortured Machiavelli and put him under house arrest and so forth. And this dedication has led to the sort of urban legend that's out there that Machiavelli's Prince was really a job application. He was a pragmatic guy, even though he had been treated so poorly by this regime, he just needed a job. So he decided to write this book and use it as a very fancy job application. Now, there's several problems with that theory. First of all, Machiavelli never did get a particularly good job from the Medicis, but maybe he just failed. Well, that would be against his whole philosophy, where success is the only thing that matters, for one thing. But there's another issue with that. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513. The magnificent Lorenzo de' Medici, who was the grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent. He is not Lorenzo the Magnificent, he's his grandson. He took power in 1516, 3 years after Machiavelli had originally drafted the book. And the book was not published until 1534, 7 years after Machiavelli died. And it was published according to Machiavelli's instructions. So what we're reading in this dedicatory letter is something that Machiavelli wanted us to read after he was dead and after Lorenzo was dead. So that's not a job application, whatever it is. There's something on Machiavelli's mind here that has to do with posterity. Okay, he's writing this book for posterity. So that's the first thing that we want to realize, is that yes, when you're actually publishing a book in those days, you need a patron who's going to support you and back you up in case you get into any trouble. But Machiavelli wasn't actually publishing this book at that time. He waited until he was dead, and he didn't need protection anymore. That's how actually dangerous his books were, that they weren't publishable in his own lifetime. So anyhow, what are we going to learn about Machiavelli here? He's writing this for us, right? He's not writing it for Lorenzo. He's writing it for us, although he wants Lorenzo to be a character that we're thinking about as we read this. The first sentence, of course, is highly important. It's going to tell us a lot. And Machiavelli, in fact, is going to tell us a lot about himself in this first sentence. But let's watch, because it's not about him, I, Machiavelli, etc. So what he's going to tell us about himself is very indirect. He's going to talk about some other things, and then we can infer from that some really important things about him. It is customary most of the time for those who desire to acquire favor with a prince to come to meet him with things that they care most for among their own, or with things that they see please him most. So notice the ambiguity from the beginning. Who is this book going to please? Is the book the thing that pleases Machiavelli, or is it the thing that's going to please Lorenzo? Both of whom are going to be dead by the time we read it. So that's an interesting question. But notice that Machiavelli has indirectly told us something about himself that he desires to acquire. He introduced himself as somebody who desires to acquire. We will see in chapter 3 that according to Machiavelli, the desire to acquire is the heart of human nature. That is the essential feature of human beings. They desire to acquire. And he's going to categorize people according to what they desire. That's the way to understand human nature and human beings. What do they desire to acquire? So, of course, he fits into that. He fits into his own theory, but he's not going to talk in the book about how he fits into his own theory. So this is something for us to look at. What does he desire to acquire? Now, the interesting thing is he's going to be dead by the time this book is published. So what can he acquire after he dies? If we think, and here's another rule of interpretation, we're drawing inferences. We think the inferences are odd and maybe we're on the wrong track, but bear with it a little bit, because sometimes what that means is there's another piece that we have to connect with to make it make sense. In this case, when we get to chapter 6, we're going to see that Machiavelli's theme in chapter 6 is the greatest men who ever lived, the greats of history. And one thing that they will have in common is that they acquired much more after they died than when they were alive. What did they acquire it, and how did they acquire it? That's going to be the theme of the book. And as we're going to see, acquisition, these are the men who acquired the most. They were the greatest at acquisition, and their acquisitions were mostly after they died. So if you put this together with the first sentence, you're seeing Machiavelli considers himself to be potentially at least one of the great men of history who can acquire more after he is dead. And this book, The Prince, is part of his strategy for how he's going to acquire that. So a lot left for us to figure out about the specifics, but that's a pretty amazing beginning. Machiavelli wants to be one of the great men of history, and this book is part of how he's going to achieve that. And this helps us to see the significance of the sentences that follow here in the dedicatory letter. Thus, one sees them, those who desire to acquire favor with the prince, many times being presented, the prince, one sees the princes many times being presented with horses, arms, cloth of gold, precious stones, and similar ornaments worthy of their greatness. So he introduces greatness, and he connects greatness of princes with a bunch of ornamental or material goods, luxurious material goods. Okay, now is that what Machiavelli thinks makes somebody great? Is that what Machiavelli cares about? We can already suspect not, but the next sentence, of course, is going to make that abundantly clear. Thus, since I desire to offer myself to your magnificence with some testimony of my homage to you, I have found nothing in my belongings that I care so much for and esteem so greatly as the knowledge of the actions of great men. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Machiavelli has now told us as clear as day what he cares about. He cares about knowledge most. So this is one of the reasons that we could call him a philosopher, although we're going to see he's not the same kind of a philosopher as, for example, Socrates, whom we're going to study later. But he cares most about knowledge. And what kind of knowledge? There's a very particular kind of knowledge that Machiavelli cares about. For Socrates, he would call that wisdom, but Machiavelli calls it knowledge of the actions of great men. So coming back to this concept of greatness, which we can already see is going to be the theme of this book. What makes you great? Machiavelli wants to be one of the great. Other people think the greatness goes with horses and ornaments, but Machiavelli thinks, no, it's a knowledge of actions that make you great. There's certain kinds of actions that make you great. That's what is the most important thing to know in life, is how to become great. Okay, and he continues that he learned these things from long experience with modern things and a continuous reading of ancient ones. So Machiavelli was experienced in political life. That's part of his knowledge base. But he was also studying ancient texts. And he was, using both of those things, comparing and contrasting them, to figure out human nature, to figure out what life is about, and to figure out the path to success as a great man, which we're going to see is a kind of leader in society. Having thought out and examined these things with great diligence for a long time, and now reduce them to one small volume, I send it to your magnificence. So Machiavelli is telling us that this book is condensing his lifetime knowledge, acquired knowledge of the actions of great men, the nature of greatness, and how to achieve it. And this is what he wants to bequeath to posterity. He wants people after he is dead to read his distilled wisdom on the nature of greatness and how to achieve it. So in the next paragraph, Machiavelli begins by talking about his judgment. And on the surface here, he's making a judgment about whether the work is really worthy of the magnificent Lorenzo. But of course, the question of the worthiness of the work, which is also connected to the purpose of the work, what is he trying to achieve in this work? He talks about it being accepted through the humanity of Lorenzo. So I think this is a clue. This work is going to be based on Machiavelli's understanding of human nature and certain lessons that he wants to teach about human nature. So it is a book that's aimed at self-knowledge for us, being human beings reading it. Machiavelli is going to help us to understand, as he says here, in a very short time, all that he has learned and understood in so many years, with so many hardships and dangers for himself. So part of it, I mean, reading, I don't think he means reading ancient books was dangerous. I think he means that his political activities were dangerous. Bear in mind, he was tortured at one point for his political connections. So Machiavelli's learned the hard way about human nature, and he's going to make it possible for us to learn in a much easier way some of the very hard lessons that he has learned. So this is sort of a promise to us that he's going to teach us about our own humanity in a way that we may not quite realize who we are and who the people around us really are. The next thing he says is that he has not ornamented his work with fulsome phrases or pompous and magnificent words, with blandishment or superfluous ornament. So previously he said that he's giving a book rather than ornaments, but now he says that the book is not ornamented in the usual way. So this is a relatively short book. It's shorter than probably most political treatises. But he's not just talking about the book is going to be shorter and more to the point, because we have to think about what does he mean by ornamental, fulsome phrases, pompous words, and things like that. What is he leaving out? Because he just repeated to us, he said at least a couple times now that this book is going to contain all of his knowledge about human greatness and how to achieve it. So we could see that not only is human greatness not the same thing as having fancy horses and fancy clothes, but human greatness is a target that requires us to focus and leave out the fluff in terms of words and phrases and concepts. As we'll see as we go through the book, the words and the phrases and the concepts that Machiavelli will be leaving out over and over again are things like truth and justice, morality. He will be leaving them out systematically. The word justice, for example, does not appear in this book. He talks one time about when you're committing crimes, you have to come up with justifications for doing it. That's the closest that he comes to using the word justice. And that is unusual for a political treatise. Classical political treatises will talk a lot about justice, and they'll talk a lot about the moral virtues. When Machiavelli talks about the moral virtues, he's going to talk about them as things that you have to pretend to have, not things that you should actually have. So I think this is the most significant implication of this, is that morality is superfluous. It's ornamental. It's not that it means nothing, because you have to understand that just like society will always have luxuries and artifice and things, and people are always going to go for that. Machiavelli understands that people are in general going to want morality, but he is also going to teach us that morality is very superficial. It doesn't actually mean anything, and nobody really takes it that seriously. And that's all we really need to know about it. We need to know that it's an act, and we need to know how to put the act on. But otherwise, we don't want that to be guiding us. That's going to be a hindrance to greatness. And finally, in this paragraph, Machiavelli talks about being in a low and mean estate, and how can he presume to talk about princes? Of course, he's not going to come out and talk about his ambitions to greatness, whatever they are. And he's not, in fact, plotting to overthrow Lorenzo or anything like that. But he makes a sort of excuse for how he, as a private, man, who used to be in government, but he's not anymore, and he's not going to be allowed to be in government anymore. How could he write about these things? And he uses a metaphor, saying if you're up on the mountain, you can see the valley. If you're down in the valley, you could see the mountain. Now, we'll see as we get into this book that Machiavelli is going to use metaphors, the same and similar metaphors, and he's going to teach that if you're a great man, if you want to be a great man, you have to be able to see both, the high and the low. You have to know the high and the low, and you have to know them as well as possible. So Machiavelli will not be stuck in the valley looking up or on the mountain looking down. He's going to be using both perspectives in this book. And if he's not going for Lorenzo's job, it would only be because he has bigger goals in mind. So we conclude the dedicatory letter with some final comments to Lorenzo, his magnificence, about this small gift which Machiavelli is giving him. And he expresses his wishes that Lorenzo would learn from it his extreme desire that Lorenzo would arrive at the greatness that fortune and his other qualities would promise him. Now, one of the things we're going to see in this book is that Machiavelli will use fortune as a term, as a key term. And his key lesson about fortune is that great men do not rely upon fortune. In fact, at the end of the book, he's going to say that fortune has to be conquered. Fortune has to be beaten down. Fortune has to be dominated. We never accept fortune. And fortune essentially means chance. We'll dig into it more, but you don't leave anything to chance if you're a great man. Okay, so by referring to fortune as the only quality that he mentions, this is confirming the implication that Machiavelli does not actually think much about Lorenzo. And Lorenzo is just a convenient sort of cipher for him to introduce this book, as well as happening to be the person who was messing up Machiavelli's life at the moment. And that's alluded to in the final sentence of the dedicatory letter, where he talks about Lorenzo being up on the summit of his height, up on this mountain. And if he would look down the low places, he would see how undeservedly Machiavelli endures a great and continuous malignity of fortune. So Machiavelli is suffering from bad fortune here. This makes it, of course, clear from the very beginning that Machiavelli has an antagonistic relationship to fortune. But is he looking for good fortune? Is he looking for favors, as he implied in the first sentence? Machiavelli is going to teach us that, again, a great man does not look for favors or rely upon fortune at all. He has a completely different approach, which we will get into, but it's going to be the art of acquisition, the ability to acquire what you desire, and to do it without relying upon others or relying upon chance in any way. That's going to be his teaching. And so we can see quite a bit from this dedicatory letter. We can see that Machiavelli has aspirations to be a great man and a greatness that will extend beyond his own lifetime. We can see that this is based on his study of the actions of great men throughout history, as well as his personal experience in political life, getting at the roots of human nature, and that he's going to be teaching people beyond the grave, teaching people after him the lessons that he has learned. This means that somebody is going to have to pick up Machiavelli's book and put it into practice. He obviously can't do that himself. So this is a book that's kind of like a fish hook, as Friedrich Nietzsche would much later say about his own works. He's trying to hook somebody to get them into a certain pattern of action that will bring about a certain kind of greatness in the world. That this greatness is not going to be connected to morality, justice, or truth, that these things are superfluous in his view, and in fact obstacles to greatness. They have to be gotten out of the way. That his primary way of conveying that will be by ignoring them, although he will bring it up from time to time in particular ways that we have to look at. But we also have to bear in mind that if he just seems to be forgetting these things over and over again, it's not accidental. That's part of his teaching itself, is that we have to learn not to bring those things into the picture. And that this new kind of greatness that is amoral, or not bound by morality, is one that is going to entail a certain hostility to chance and fortune, and an attitude of conquering them. So what kind of a teaching is this going to be? What kind of a vision of leadership? It's easy to assume that an amoral or even immoral theory of leadership is going to lead to chaos. It's going to lead to anarchy and civil war and things like that. As we get into the Prince, we're going to see a lot of times it may look that way. Some of the actions that he's promoting and that he is celebrating. But we will see that actually Machiavelli has a vision for society, a vision that he thinks is going to make the majority of people, if not everyone, happier. He's going to say that. That in his kind of society, we would be happier than we are in society as it previously existed. So he does have, in fact, a vision of leadership, which is it has been highly influential, as we'll see, and is well worth considering whether we agree with his premises and his conclusions or not.